I'm Natasha Kirchek, and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. Coming up in today's newscast, Israeli jets reportedly carry out even more airstrikes in Syria. Thousands of IDF reservists take part in a surprise drill. And if you appreciate aged liquor, you'll want to hear about an outlandish historical discovery that's just been made in the Holy Land. Stay tuned for the latest news in Israel. Syrian reports are claiming that Israeli jets carried out even more airstrikes near Damascus this morning. The allegations come just hours after the Israeli Prime Minister vowed to continue hitting weapon convoys that are making their way to Hezbollah, even though Russia has ordered Israel to suspend airstrikes. ILTV's Aaron Porras joins us with more. Aaron?
Thank you, Natasha. The strikes took place just outside the mountains in Damascus. And Jerusalem has yet to comment on the airstrikes, as is per usual. There's also been no word on casualties or damages, but let's look at my report for more.
The airstrike followed fierce clashes where pro-Assad forces were reported to have shelled and conducted airstrikes against opposition fighters, including the Fateh al-Sham front formerly associated with al-Qaeda. Lately, Israeli-Syrian tensions have been escalating, as Israel is alleged to have carried out a similar airstrike Sunday night targeting weapons convoys, and is believed to have been behind a drone strike killing a senior pro-Assad militant 2 days ago. On Friday, an Israeli airstrike in Syria narrowly missed a Russian asset, prompting Moscow to summon the Israeli envoy following the incident. The Prime Minister has denied that Moscow has asked him to halt airstrikes within Syria, though, and has stated that Israel reserves the right to strike at weapons convoys and Iranian military targets in Syria. Throughout the Syrian civil war, the embattled Assad regime has been continuously propped up by the Lebanese terror group Hezbollah and the Islamic Iran and Russia.
Thousands of Israeli army reservists were called down to the Gaza Strip this week, but it wasn't to fight. Instead, the soldiers took part in the military's largest planned exercise of 2017, and it was totally a surprise. The drill began on Sunday to simulate a war in Gaza, including a ground invasion into the coastal enclave. 4 reserve brigades and 2 infantry and 2 armored brigades took part in the simulation, making up a total of 2,000 soldiers. The chief of the IDF, Gadi Eisenkot, says the massive exercise is necessary to truly assess how ready the army is to take on a war in Gaza. That way, Eisenkot says the army will be able to make the next operation as, quote, short as possible. Israel has fought 3 major wars with Hamas since the terror group seized control of the Gaza Strip in 2007. The last conflict took place in 2014 for 50 days during the summer, known as Operation Protective Edge, and 74 Israelis were killed. Hamas vows to destroy Israel and has since rebuilt larger rocket arsenals and underground attack tunnels to assault Israeli citizens. In the meantime, Israel is drawing contingency plans to protect Israelis living near borders with the Gaza Strip and Lebanon. The military is planning to evacuate over 250,000 citizens from such areas should Hamas and Hezbollah plan to carry out an attack. Such a massive evacuation is unheard of and has never taken place in the history of Israel. But the evacuation plan, codenamed as Safe Distance, is all part of a bigger plan being coordinated between the army and Israeli municipalities. Evacuees would be housed in existing infrastructure, including kibbutz guest houses, schools, and hotels, and the plan would cover up to 250,000 people. Smaller groups would stay behind in the evacuated areas to ensure that the community infrastructure is maintained and that they will be able to function the day after the fighting. The last time that tens of thousands of Israelis left their homes was in 2014 during the 50-day conflict between Israel and the Gaza Strip. Israel is preparing in case there is a new round of warfare that breaks out, especially given that both the Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah and the Hamas rulers of the Gaza Strip vowed to destroy the state of Israel. Both groups have warned that a new conflict would be worse than wars from the past. Israel claims that Hezbollah and Hamas have already rebuilt larger arsenals that are capable of hitting the entirety of the Jewish nation. Ethiopian Jews are taking to the streets in an effort to push the Israeli government to hurry up and let their remaining relatives immigrate to Israel from Ethiopia. The Israeli Finance Ministry already approved funds for the absorption of 1,300 Ethiopians. According to the 2016 plan, 6,000 Ethiopian Jews were supposed to be brought to Israel over a 5-year period, with about 100 arriving each month. But since then, only one plane load with 63 new immigrants has arrived. Several Knesset members, including one from Ethiopia, are accusing the Interior Ministry of inaction that may cost lives. Most of the Jews in the African country live in abject poverty, and the malnutrition rates among their toddlers is more than twice as high as that among the population at large. The Israeli government's also been lagging in creating a framework to facilitate the immigration of about 3,000 more Ethiopians, known as falashmura. They also want to come, but their, quote, Jewishness is uncertain, because their ancestors were forced to convert to Christianity. This means they need to obtain special permission so their dreams of rejoining their families already in Israel can come true. Thanks to earlier efforts, today there are now about 200,000 people of Ethiopian origin living in the Jewish state. The Israeli government is really showing its appreciation for mothers around the country because paid maternity leaves have just been legally extended from 14 to 15 weeks. ILTV's Aaron Porras has a scoop. It looks like it's time to become a mama in Israel, no?
Yeah, I mean, I can't do that.
Unfortunately, you can't.
Unfortunately, I can't become a mama myself. But I'll tell you, the bill passed its second and third readings unanimously in a vote of 46-0. Under the new language of the legislation, the extension will apply to all new mothers who've given birth since the first of this year, 2017.
And dads don't have it so bad here either, which I'm sure you're going to tell us about in your report.
Let's turn to it.
And fathers, don't get too jealous. The law looks at your role as well. Under the previous laws, new dads were allowed to take part of their mother's paid leave, provided they took at least 3 weeks. The new bill reduces the mandatory minimum to 1 week. Kulanu MK Rachel Azaria, who proposed the bill with Joint Arab List MK Dov Khanin, said, quote, extending maternity leave and the option for fathers to take part in this period at the same time is a historic change, end quote. The Knesset has also reportedly committed to reviewing another extension of maternity leave to 16 weeks in 6 months.
Many of us have heard of the best-selling book Startup Nation, which tells a story behind Israel's high-tech innovation. Well, now a new book on the topic by Amir Bobut and the Jerusalem Post editor Yaakov Katz has made it onto bestsellers list, but it focuses more specifically on Israeli military high-tech. ILTV's Steve Leibowitz sat down with Katz, who says Israel's constant security concerns are all behind the innovation.
We're all familiar with how necessity is the mother of all invention, right? How when your back is up against the wall, you have no choice but to innovate, but to invent, but to create. And I think that's, for a large part, Israel's story. If we look at the technologies that Israel has excelled in developing over the years, we have about a 60% market share over drone exports throughout the world. We are the #1 country in the development of missile defense. We have a multi-tier architecture with Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow 2, Arrow 3. We have our own tanks that we develop, the Merkava tank. Cyber technology, satellites. So all of this together, when you look at these stories, and those are the stories that we tell in the book, are stories of how the shadow of the guillotine sharpens the mind. When Israel feared that it was possibly not going to survive, that's what spurred innovation. That's what created these amazing weapons that have changed, to a large part also, the way modern wars are fought.
How much of these new weaponry, came from within the army, from those working inside the framework of the IDF?
The vast majority. You have, for example, the first drone. I don't know how many people know this story, but back in 1968, we're just a few months after the Six-Day War, and we had a big problem, which was how do we see what's happening just over the Suez Canal, right? The Egyptians were on one side, we were on the other side. How do we see what's going on? And there was no real way to gather intelligence. They tried to fly aircraft, they tried to build towers, they tried all these different things. And then one guy came up with an idea, an IDF officer, a young major in the military intelligence, to buy toy airplanes in New York City, bring them to Israel. They attached cameras to their bellies and flew remote-control toy airplanes that you could have bought at FAO Schwartz at the time over the Suez Canal. That was the first drone basically flown in the world, was flown by an Israeli over the Suez Canal. And that's what turned into an industry that today brings in about $1 billion to $1.5 billion annually into the Israeli economy in drone exports. There were in 2010 5 NATO countries flying Israeli drones in Afghanistan. You have drones flown by Australia, Germany, France, places in Africa, Brazil, and of course the United States and Canada. So that's in drones, and you saw that came from within the military. There was a need to see what's happening in Egypt, and they created the drone with satellites back in 1977. Anwar Sadat came here, began it was clear there was going to be this peace process, and a peace process would lead to an Israeli withdrawal from the Sinai. There was one officer, again in military intelligence, different one, who said, how are we going to see what's happening in the Sinai? And he said, let's build a satellite. And people thought he was insane. Because back in the 1970s, let's remember, who had satellites? Who could independently launch a satellite? The Soviets, the Americans, the Japanese, the Chinese. You had to be a superpower, not little Israel. But he pushed, he persevered, he was persistent, determined, and together with some other people, and they managed to not only build a satellite, but build a launcher that could put that satellite in space, which is even a far greater feat than building the actual satellite itself. So again, the need and the need to survive and to get this intelligence, to see what's happening, is what pushed these people to come up with these ideas.
We're all used to hearing stories about how it's Israeli tech that's responsible for integral parts of our cell phones, computers, and other electronics. But I bet you didn't know that Israelis are also active on the music scene and right now are preparing to bring some of our best-loved hits to the international stage. Who doesn't love Radiohead? Well, an Israeli group called Dudu Tassa and the Kuwaitis are joining the British rockers on their U.S. tour this spring and throughout the summer. Tassa has a unique sound, integrating melodies rooted in his Iraqi Jewish heritage with modern rock. His band's first performance with Radiohead is going to be showcased in Miami on March 30th. And that's not all. Another Israeli group, Shai Ben Sur and the Rajasthan Express, is set to open for Radiohead at several performances in Europe. Tzul spends a lot of time in India, and his compositions are often a blend of Hebrew, Urdu, and Hindi. He's actually worked with Radiohead before, and those aren't the only collaborations between Israel and the alt-rocking Brits. Johnny Greenwood, who's considered one of the very best guitarists in the world, is married to an Israeli visual artist, and the happy couple has 3 children. The band has long placed at the top of both listener and critics lists, and it has a huge following in Israel. Local fans can catch their performance with the extra Israeli spice thrown in at Tel Aviv's Yarkon Park on July 19th. Whether you're traveling by land, sea, or air, you may not realize it, but you're probably relying more and more on global positioning satellites for your data collection and use. Well, joining me in the studio today is Eitan Livne, the CEO of Orbit Technologies, which for the past 20 years has been leading the way in satellite communications technology. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much for having me.
So let's begin. What exactly does Orbit do? Break it down for those of us who know nothing about this satellite world.
So actually, when you speak about satellite communication, there is the space segment and there is the other side, which is the ground segment, the ground part of the communication, whether it's on ship, the ground itself, or on the plane or a train these days. So we are in that part, we are supplying the ground terminals, and we are connected between the satellite itself to the users on ground. We started, as you mentioned, over 20 years ago, mainly on the maritime part. We were specialized on stabilized.
Now, who are your clients, though? I mean, it's not just individuals who want to go onto the computer,
no.
Right? You're working with bigger companies.
We work with bigger companies. Started back then. We started with the maritime systems, and we supply different commercial ships or shipyards and navies in the world. Mm-hmm. Then different airplane manufacturers and airplane operators.
Now, when you're talking about what you actually supplied them with was communications, ability to use things like Wi-Fi or data, correct?
Yeah, we supply the terminal that helps the communication between the space S segment, the satellite,
right,
and the users on board or that platform on the move.
This is so important because this is the means through which people who are in the middle of the sea, or I guess flying in the air, are able to kind of connect with the outside world, right? So this is a big deal. Now, tell us a little bit about how satellite communications as a whole have changed in the past couple of years.
The world of satellite is undergoing change, where there are building now big constellations of low Earth orbit and medium Earth orbit, mm-hmm. which are much closer to Earth, and they are moving as well, because when you are far away in a geostationary satellites, the satellite is fixed to the ground, and where there is a lower Earth orbit, then the orbit is moving as well, and you have to follow after a moving target, let's call it. So you need to have a very accurate antenna, very accurate terminal that can follow after the satellite as well. You are on the move and the satellite is on the move. So that is our expertise.
Interesting. Now tell us a little bit about what Earth observations are. This is something I know nothing about, so I kind of want you to tell us what that means.
Okay, Earth observation is another segment of the world of satellites. The people in the world are interested to learn more about Earth. And in order to do that, they use satellites, not for communication, as you mentioned earlier, but to watch what's going on ground. They want to know
Google Maps, for example.
Maps.
Right.
You want to know about the weather. You want to know about geological phenomena. You want to go about agriculture. You help the well-being of the people by watching about what's going on in
the environment.
The environment.
Yeah.
And the satellite take the picture with every kind of sensor you use, and then while he over the ground segment, orbit ground segment, we call it Gaia, that's the name we gave it, it shoot down, or it transmit, the satellite transmit, and we collect the data, and then we transmit it back to the processors and the users.
So interesting. So you're not only providing a communication outlet for companies, you're also providing data collection.
Yeah.
And who are some of those clients, though? I imagine are environmental...
Universities, research organization, national organization that follow Earth, intelligence users, every kind of user you can imagine that needs information about what's going on in the Earth, looking from high above.
Right, because this can provide so much information for research on
Yeah.
potential, environmental changes that are going to take place in the future.
Yeah, in these days you can see and hear about students in high school even, not in university or in Technion, but universities, Technion, university in the world, national kind of space agencies, everybody that looks on the Earth, on the oceans, and need to collect the data from orbit of satellites, that is kind of our customers.
Well, it's very, very interesting. I mean, I know that back in the day when satellites were being used more primarily for taking images and Google Maps and things like that, I used to look and be able to see, you can see my house in those pictures. Those, there's very real applications to satellite use for, people just like you and me. But it seems like you guys have really found a way to kind of use satellites in a positive way for, major companies around the world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, it's just become official. The wandering Israeli basketball star Omri Caspi is no longer without a team. It looks like he's just signed on to the NBA's Minnesota Timberwolves. After launching his illustrious sports career with the championship Maccabi Tel Aviv team, Caspi became the first Israeli athlete to ever play in the U.S. National Basketball Association. This latest deal marks the 5th team the 6'9" forward has joined since being drafted back in 2009, and that includes 3 teams just this past month. He was traded by the Sacramento Kings to the New Orleans Pelicans, but just got waived after breaking his thumb in his debut game. Now Caspi's returning to the court with the Timberwolves pack in time for 13 games left in the regular season. At this point, you really need a scorecard just to keep up with this unstoppable Israeli rebounder. Baseball has never been a big sport here in Israel, but now it looks like that's changing, and it's all because of the recent performance of the Israeli baseball team. The Jew crew ended up performing very strongly in the World Baseball Classic, to the point that there are now plans underway to build a baseball stadium in Israel. The stadium is set to be built in Beit Shemesh, a city that's located near Jerusalem with a pretty big population of American expats. After the Israeli baseball team scored 3 victories in the first round of the WBC, the stadium project opened up a crowdfunding campaign and ended up receiving thousands of dollars in donations. The goal is $850,000, but as of now, the campaign has only received 11. Hopes are high, though, especially since the city of Beit Shemesh has already provided the Israel Association of Baseball with the land for the complex. It should include a regulation-sized baseball field for adult play plus 2 smaller fields for youth baseball, dugouts, batting cages, lights, and spectator stands. The Israel Association of Baseball was founded back in 1986 by a group of expats who love the game, and to date has about 1,000 participants throughout Israel. All right, we've all heard about euphemisms for liquor, such as the term liquid courage, and it seems some of the British troops stationed in the Holy Land during the First World War were pretty bold based on an extremely surprising and really rather funny new archaeological find just outside of Jerusalem. Right in the middle of a 250,000-year-old Paleolithic period dig, Israeli archaeologists were stunned to find empty liquor bottles. Turns out there also used to be British barracks in the area exactly 100 years ago.
אנחנו בחפירה מטעם רשות העתיקות שבמהלכה נחשף המבנה הזה שאתם רואים כאן, מבנה מן התקופה העות'מאנית, שחיילים בריטים עשו בו שימוש בזמן מלחמת העולם הראשונה.
הצבא הבריטי שהה כאן כ9 חודשים, כאשר בעצם הוא התקדם צפונה לכיבוש שאר הארץ, ובעצם להדיפת העות'מאנים בארץ ישראל, בו נפתח עידן חדש של נוכחות הבריטית בארץ ישראל.
בסמוך לשרידי המבנה הזה נמצא בור אשפה ששימש את אותם חיילים בריטים, שבור האשפה הכיל עולם ומלואו עם שברי בקבוקים מרתקים שכל אחד זה סיפור בפני עצמו.
Some pretty interesting music used under that video. Well, there weren't just a few bottles found either. Literally hundreds of containers for whiskey, wine, beer, gin, and even some fine liquors were dumped at the site. There were a few soft drink bottles too, but those were in the minority.
האתר חושף בפנינו, לראשונה אפשר לומר, איזושהי עדות אותנטית, ישירה, בלתי אמצעית, של ממצאים מחיי היום-יום של החיילים הבריטים ששהו כאן זמן כה רב.
בין הממצאים המעלבים שאנחנו מוצאים, יש לנו 2 בקבוקים האלו שהם שימשו רטבים ושאשר יוצרו ביורקשיר. הבקבוק הזה שבו יצרו בירה, גביעי, יין, פקק נחמד ומיוחד עם כתובת וכפתורים של מדים של חיילי הצבא הבריטי.
Looks like these guys were really digging in. History experts say that a British expeditionary force was based in the area in 1917. They set up camp under the command of General Allenby before moving on to conquer Jerusalem from the Ottoman Empire. Dozens of uniform buttons and belt buckles were also unearthed, as was a first of its kind discovery of the silver tip of a swagger stick that once belonged to a Royal Flying Corps officer.
אחד הממצאים המלהיבים בחפירה הזאת הוא ראש מקל מנהיגות של קצין בריטי. הקצינים אהבו לשים אותם תחת בית השחי או להראות לכפופים בעזרתו מה לעשות. זהו ראש המקל הראשון שמצאנו בחפירה ארכיאולוגית בארץ ישראל, וזה בהחלט מרגש.
The dry details of history tell us that the Brits were stationed at this particular spot for only about 9 months. And based on what was left behind, it appears they had a fine time during their brief stay.
The Hebrew word of the day is brought to you by the University of Haifa, Hebrew Summer Ulpan, open to everyone.
And now for our Hebrew word of the day. After finding hundreds of old British bottles from the First World War era in Israel, it's only natural that today's word is bakbuk, meaning bottle. Bakbukim, or bottles, are everywhere. We use them all the time, and they come in all different shapes, sizes, and materials. So next time you go to buy milk at the store, you can buy a bakbuk shluchit, or a glass bottle, or a bakbuk plasti, meaning a plastic bottle. If you prefer, here in Israel, you could even buy your milk in a bag. That's a real thing. It exists here. Just remember to always recycle whatever bakbuk you drink from, but the next time you pop a bakbuk open, call your friends at ILTV. We'd love to join you. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight has a chance of thunderstorms and flash flooding with a low of 55 or 13 degrees Celsius. You can expect more possible storms tomorrow with a high of 69 or 21 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.66 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv. Thanks for watching and see you next time.